Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and I'm so happy that you're here so that we can talk about all of the books that I read in January. Before we get into the actual books, I'm going to go over some of my reading statistics just because I nerd out when other creators talk about that, so I want to make sure I'm sharing it with you guys too. I read 7 books in January for a total of 3,644 pages. My average rating was a 3.54, which means while I did have some good books, I also had some not so good books and I had some very mid books. Most of them were pretty mid books. I had a lot of 3.5 ratings this month. I read 7 books in total along with 1 DNF, and then just like the other little story graph details that it throws out at you, 67% of the books I read were over 500 pages this month, which means I read some chunky books, which makes me happy. And then I read 33% of my books between 300 and 499 pages. The thing that really baffled me looking at my statistics this month was the format of the books that I read. So I'm looking at my little journal where I wrote down everything, but 29% of my books were physical copies, 14% was audio, and 57% I read on my Kindle. So I love my Kindle, but I really used it for all of its money's worth. Let's talk about the actual books and genres and everything I read. I read 1 thriller, I read 2 romance, 3 romantasy, and 1 fantasy book along with the 1 DNF, which I will talk about. I am going to go in order of genres this time instead of going from lowest rated to highest rated, just so if there's a genre that you are more savvy to, you can just skip to that section. But let's talk about my DNF first. I started the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy, the first book being Guild, and I actually made it about, I think, 63% into the book, and it honestly just wasn't holding my interest anymore. It was a buddy read that a bunch of us in a Discord were doing, and a lot of them have gone on to continue the series and they really like it. The subject matter in the beginning of Guild is quite shocking. It's a King Midas retelling, and it wasn't the shocking subject matter that was getting to me. It was like I just needed a little more complexity to the story, and it wasn't scratching an itch I had at the moment. So it's on KU. I can always go back to it if I want to, but it is a book that I put down for now. We are going to start with thrillers, and I actually did read this book physically, but I have lent it to a coworker, so I don't have it in my possession at this time. That book is Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. This is a book about a man named Grady, and he has just published his first New York Times bestseller book ever. He's so excited for his wife to get home so that he can celebrate, but she never makes it home. She's on a phone call with him. She's like, hey, there's somebody in the road. I need to go help them. And that's the last time he ever talks to her. We fast forward a year later, and he is really struggling to write a book. So his publisher calls him and is like, I really think you need some time away. I actually have a place on an island that you can go and kind of be free from contact from other people, and it's just really cool and full of nature, and maybe you can go right there and just focus all of your attention on your next book. So he does, but when he gets to this island, he starts to wonder if he is seeing his wife who disappeared everywhere. There's other really weird, quirky things about the island. It kind of reminded me if M. Night Shyamalan's The Village had felt a little bit more modern. It's a very close-knit community, and you can definitely get the sense that Grady is the outsider as he spends time on the island. So this book was really fun. It had the typical Alice Feeney flavor. She threw a twist that you weren't expecting at you, but I just thought that the main character was so stupid, and I couldn't get around that, which is why I didn't give this a higher rating than I did. So because of Grady's just absolute lack of any common sense, I couldn't rate the book higher than I did. Let's talk about my romance reads next. The first romance book that I read was Powerless by Elsie Silver. This is the 3rd in the Chestnut Spring series, and in this book we follow Sloane and Jasper. Sloane is a ballerina who is about to make a very poor decision and marry a man that she is not in love with. She is marrying a man that her family thinks will make for good business connections, but she really isn't a fan of him at all. And she has a childhood best friend who is kind of the pseudo brother of the Eaton family. He grew up with them after some things in his own family went very south and he needed a family to take him in. So the Eatons provided that home for him, and he definitely looks at them as if they are family. So Sloane, ballerina, Jasper, professional hockey player. And as they were growing up, these two kind of always had a thing, but they never acted on it. And Jasper cannot stand the fact that Sloane is about to get married to this man that she doesn't love. It's a runaway bride situation. She is getting married. He is at the wedding. She is like, I'm not doing it. And so he whisks her away. This story turns into a road trip story as they kind of have this thing that they have to do together to deliver some hay to another farm. And so you have a like traveling trope, you have a forced proximity trope. And while I did like Sloane's growth in this story, and I also liked the character of Jasper when he was not in like one of the romantic scenes, I liked him a lot. He was a very sad boy. He was very in touch with his feelings, but didn't know how to speak about them, talk about them. He is a very reserved, closed off character. I did not like the spicy scenes in this book. It's one thing to like read a book and be like, I don't want to read the spicy scenes. I'll typically read them, but I didn't like the type of spice that was in this book. Once he was comfortable with her, it was just very controlling and authoritative, and I just didn't like the way he came across. I originally rated this book a 4, but looking back on it, I really didn't like the spice, so I knocked it down to a 3.5. The next romance I read, I picked up because I needed a book that was going to be short and sweet before the release of Onyx Storm. So about 2 years ago, I picked up the Eden series by Devney Perry. It starts with Indigo Ridge, the next book is Juniper Hill, and then the third book is Garnet Flats, which is the one that I picked up. It follows a family and the romantic escapades of the siblings within the family. So this book is about Talia Eden, and she is a doctor in the small town that she has grown up in. She's really struggling with feeling like she's not being taken seriously by the other doctors and nurses at the hospital. And other than that, she lives a very basic life. She doesn't really do much outside of her job. She goes home, she goes to work, she hangs out with her family, and that's about it. She had a man that she was absolutely head over heels in love with when she was in college, and his name was Ford. And Ford was an MMA fighter. When they were in college, she was about to move away to grad school, and he was going to help her move, and then out of the blue, he broke up with her, and a few weeks later, married her best friend. She's always had lots of questions about it, but decided that it was best to make a clean cut and not communicate with him anymore. Fast forward 7 years later, he shows up in her hometown and is fighting to get her back. There was a lot in this story that just felt very like overdone and hyperbolic, and I did not believe the relationship could happen in the way in which it did. I feel like Talia forgave Ford way too easily, and there wasn't enough groveling and like trying to prove his point. What I did like about this book were the MMA scenes. I haven't watched UFC or MMA in quite some time, but I did for a while there, and I really enjoyed it. And so I liked the kind of inside look we got at that. But as far as the relationship, I struggled to buy into it the whole book. This was another one I gave a 3.5. I think Devney Perry's writing is amazing. I think her characters on their own are amazing. I just didn't believe the romance of this book. Now let's get into Romantasy, my biggest category of the month of January. The first one I read and the first one that I want to talk about, so I can just get it out of the way, is Quicksilver by Callie Hart. What is this book even about? It's so hard to explain. You've got this girl, she lives in this place where there's like no water, and she's scrappy and she's fighting to survive, and she gets captured because she's a thief, and like very, very copy paste other Romantasy stories that you've read. And then as she's about to be executed, she finds a portal to the Fae realm. Oh my gosh. And then she finds out she's like really special. And I need Romantasy that's not cookie cutter. Okay guys, I just do. And when she gets to this Fae realm, she meets the big broody Fae who is, you know, so cursed and so tortured at heart, and he's so mean to her, but really he loves her. But guys, no. If a character is going to be that mean to another character, there is no basis for a love story. It's just not for me. And so this book was not for me, and it is for so many people. And if it worked for you, I'm glad that you invested like the 700 pages of the book into loving it. I really wanted to find the point where I was going to be like, oh, this is what everybody's talking about, but it never happened for me. I could not take how mean the male main character was. And then it was like a light switch, and then it was super lovey-dovey. There were about 3 or 4 smut scenes in this, and by the time I got to the second or third one, I just was rolling my eyes and skipping the pages. I didn't care. The side characters were probably the best part about it, but even they felt a little bit flat and one-dimensional. So unless I am hearing rave reviews from people that I trust with my whole entire heart who felt the same as me about book 1, I think I'm not continuing this series. I gave it a 2.75. Promised that was the worst book I'm going to talk about, so if you don't like hearing me complain, I'm done. The next book I read was also a book called Powerless, and this is by Lauren Roberts. I'm sure you all have heard of it. It is a YA romantasy story that is very in the vein of the selection of The Hunger Games, Red Queen, the Lunar Chronicles. This was an in-person book club pick for me, and so I really was never going to read Powerless. It didn't interest me because of all of the comps to other stories that I've already read. I was like, I don't need to read that. I've already read something just like it. But I actually ended up being very pleasantly surprised. I found the audio on Everand, and it was an audiobook that I was able to just throw on and listen to while I went about like chores and going on walks and that kind of thing. I didn't have to put that much thought or effort into it. And it really did bring me back to the days where I like binge listened to the Lunar Chronicles. Different kinds of stories, but I feel like the narrator felt very similar. The characters felt very similar to those books. And I'm not even going to go into what this one is about because I feel like if it was a book you were going to read, you've probably already read it. And I had a lot of fun. So this one was another 3.5. It wasn't mind-blowing, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So I enjoyed it more than what I was expecting. All right, I actually have a physical book to hold up for this one, even though I didn't read it physically. I finally got my book trophy. I read Onyx Storm. I do have a whole spoiler video, which I will link below if you want to see me react to this book. This is by Rebecca Yarros. It's part of the Empyrean series, if you haven't heard of it. The first book is Fourth Wing, the second book is Iron Flame, and we have all been waiting on pins and needles for the third book, which is Onyx Storm. I feel like Violet and Xaden both really grew up in this book. I felt like they felt more mature. I felt like the writing was a lot more clean. The one thing that I will complain about, and it is probably what most people will complain about, is I feel like there were too many character name drops that just in the grand scheme of things were irrelevant. And I've heard people make arguments for why that's realistic, but overall, like, it just made those scenes less enjoyable for me because I was going, I don't remember this person. And it's not even like the Wheel of Time, because the Wheel of Time, there's like 10 million character names dropped, but they all have some sort of relevance. Here it was just like, oh yeah, there's Bob and Sally over there, those second wing riders, they're about to fight. I'm like, I don't remember Bob and Sally, and then they're not mentioned again in the rest of the book, and it was hard to follow those scenes where it was just like name, 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 name. But overall, I really had a good time. We learned so much more about the world and about dragons, and our characters grew, and she did leave us on a cliffhanger, but it wasn't the cliffhanger I was expecting to be left on. And now we wait 2 years for the next book. I'm here for all of the speculation and theories though, so if you're a person that likes to chat those things, please hit me up, okay? I want to talk about it. And then the fantasy category. I only read one fantasy book, and I immersive read this one, so I can't remember if I tracked it as Kindle or audio, but I like did it at the same time. And that is Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty, which is the third and final book in the Daevabad trilogy. This is a series that we read over at my Patreon. I wish we had read it a little bit closer together, but my life got crazy, so we did have several months in between all of the installments, but this was just so much fun. There was so much world building, lore, character growth, magic. It was a very enchanting but also politically brutal series of books, and I'm really satisfied with the way that this book wrapped up. I can't talk about any of it because it's the third book in a series, but the overall vibes is this is very Egyptian, Middle Eastern, magic inspired. There's magic carpets, there's djinn, there's a lot of political scheming and relationships and familial drama. And the world building and the way that you just feel like you are like robed in the culture of this series was purely enchanting. And I have picked up S.A. Chakraborty's other series, The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. I read that book when it first came out, and I'm eagerly awaiting for her to release the second book because I really just do eat her writing up. One more thing I wanted to show you guys, since this is a monthly wrap up, I have been working on a genre blanket based on all of the books that I'm going to read, and so I figured at the end of each of my monthly wrap-ups I could also show you the progress on my blanket. Technically one row of this blanket is from February because I have already finished one book in February. Here she is so far, and I'll also go over all of the colors with you. So this is navy, which is for thrillers, and this was for Beautiful Ugly. We then have 2 rows for romantasy, so that is Quicksilver and Powerless. 2 rows for romance, so we have Powerless and Garnet Flats. This purple right here is Onyx Storm, and then the first row of Seafoam is for Empire of Gold. And then you guys can obviously see that I have started another fantasy, which I will talk about in my February wrap up. But I really like the bright colors. I have tried to make a genre blanket one time in the past, and the colors just didn't really go together. They were very muted. So I know these are very like bright and random, but I really think this keeps me interested. Changing colors when you crochet is just something that adds not only visual interest, but it keeps your project interesting. And I'm also doing this pattern, which is called a granny stripe, instead of just doing like solid rows, and I like the way it's coming together. All right, guys, that is everything that I read in January. I would love to know what your favorite book that you read in January was. Obviously, my highest rated book with a 4.5 was Onyx Storm. No 5 stars in January, but hopefully that is coming soon. Fingers crossed. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support my channel. A link to my Patreon and all of my social media is in the box down below. I would love to have you as my friend on Instagram or TikTok or any of those things, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye, guys.